of the EMU, including ex-ante policy coordination, and the idea of contractual arrangements will be further examined at the June European Council. These are wide-ranging and complex issues, and I welcome President Van Rompuy's efforts to make the process as transparent as possible. Discussions at national level have just started on these issues, and specific proposals are still to be tabled. Many Member States have yet to develop a formal position. At recent Council meetings, views appeared to converge more on the issue of ex-ante coordination, while more uncertainty and diverging views were noted on the issue of mutually agreed contracts, and even more so on solidarity mechanisms. The contractual commitments proposed will warrant further consideration. These ideas need to be examined so we can be clear on what might be involved. They raise many questions and complex issues, but yet they may ultimately have a contribution to make. Before I conclude, I would like to comment on the proposals on economic and monetary union on the enhancement of democratic legitimacy as part of the process. As a parliamentarian, I believe that we need to strengthen our institutions at European level, that we ensure that they do not become more remote from our citizens. In fact, the opposite must be the case. In Ireland, we have direct experience of the risks of people feeling disconnected from decision-making at a European level. There is, of course, a tension between acting quickly and decisively and engaging in wide, open-ended consultation. But democratic legitimacy and accountability cannot be an afterthought. They are part of our shared European values, but they are also a crucial underpinning of the long-term stability of the whole system. Any agreed changes require democratic debate and agreement. The role of our Parliament and the European Parliament is central to this debate. The Irish Presidency will continue to work closely with President Van Rompuy as he explores options for the further evolution of EMU, one that offers a suitable response to the great challenges that we face. The process leading up to the June European Council presents us with an opportunity to take stock of the important progress we have made in recent months and to outline a vision for a prosperous future for the European Union. A strengthened economic and monetary union is critical to the stability and well-being of the euro area and indeed the entire European Union. We have been tested, and the pressures brought to bear on EMU have been almost unprecedented. But do not doubt for one second that our economic and monetary union will not emerge stronger, clearer and more sustainable from the crisis. The challenge now for European leaders is to put in place the policies we have already agreed upon and those that are still urgently needed to ensure that the confidence which has returned in the euro area will remain well into the future, and to put all member states, large and small, on a stable trajectory towards growth and prosperity in a closer, more solid, more balanced union. And we, as Presidency, will be in the forefront of these efforts. I'd like to thank you very much indeed.
Of this morning's session. I'll be taking questionnaires and contributions in batches of 5, and colleagues are free to make either a contribution, make a comment, make a statement or ask a question, but regardless of what they choose, they will be limited to 2 minutes in that approach. So if your priority is to ask a question and you spend your time commenting and then expect a question, that won't be facilitated. You will have 2 minutes specifically to make a contribution. So with that said, the first person I'd like to call in this morning, the first contributor, is Monsieur Philippe Marini from France. Monsieur Marini.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Et je me réjouis de cette réunion comme des réunions précédentes organisées entre parlementaires nationaux.
At this meeting, as I was at the previous meeting of members of the national parliaments, the TSG in
pour
Article
les parlements nationaux
15
une certaine association.
foresees a certain association of national parliaments.
De la présidence
What
du
I
Conseil
would like from the
que
presidency of the Council and from the Commission and European Parliament
cette association soit organisée
is that this association of the national parliaments be organized in a very specific fashion, as we're now doing here today, on the basis of subjects, so as to structure our discussion. And I would like to make a proposal
dont l'acronyme anglais est BEPS,
the
Basis Evasion
OECD
and Profit
is doing the
Sharing or
work.
Shifting, me semble nécessiter des échanges entre parlementaires nationaux. Ceci en vue de comprendre et en vue de prévoir, lorsque l'on évoque le besoin d'une intégration croissante.
Just a half a minute to wrap up, Mr. Marini.
Yes. Pour être très concret, je propose que dans de futurs échanges au cours du semestre irlandais, on veuille bien traiter de cette question spécifique entre parlementaires nationaux. Est-ce que demain ou après-demain, l'impôt sur les sociétés disparaîtra de nos finances publiques?
Should we keep a part, and which part, and how can we see to it that our fellow citizens be better involved in the choice of fiscal policies?
Merci, Président. Monsieur le commissaire, je voudrais apporter une dimension supplémentaire et m'inquiéter.
Add a dimension here and think about these fiscal policies which focus on expenditure, employment. You talk about the poverty levels and you talk about the conditions that have to be fulfilled for a situation in which we can create jobs, respond to the climate challenges, work in terms of the world economy and look after the needs of the poor. Now, of course, we have to have flexibility given the different situations in the different countries. You also have to have a capacity to invest in the economy of the future, in research and development, in training, training workers, energy issues, and this fiscal consolidation that we're seeing now means that we can't necessarily make progress on all of that. Also, social progress when it comes to the Union and also combating poverty. We have to think about the whole generation being sacrificed. The chairman talked in his introduction about the phenomenon of youth unemployment. We think we have to preserve social models and get the social partners involved in a democratic manner in the whole discussion. Now, when it comes to banking, we talk about banking supervision, and we have to regulate the banking sector and reform the banks, because in our countries, as in others, there's a form of credit crunch, so it's impossible for businesses to get financing because banks prefer the financial markets to the real economy. Now, I'd also like to talk about fiscal coherence between our member states. They're in competition with one another, and so they're trying to get companies set up. And then I would finish by talking about revenue, for example, the financial transaction tax. Then you talked about exports, but we're also the victims of imports, which are taking place on the basis of a social and environmental criteria, which are less ideal than our own. So how can we protect ourselves from that too? So how can we have to do all these things, but there also has to be hope that it will be possible to invest in the economy of the future, not only in clean growth, but also in energy production, energy capacities, which might then lead in turn to the creation of large numbers of jobs.
Minister, first of all, the economic and social models in the EU are challenged by the economic and financial crisis. The question is the role of the state. The state will not be able, from my conviction, to stop the structural change. Therefore, we should concentrate to use our money to try to influence the structural change. We have the demographic change, we have markets which are saturated, we have the climate change, and we have a lack of innovation and a technology gap, and we have a political dilemma. Citizens turn in crisis back to national approaches. But we lack of institutional integration in the EU. We learned that a common currency needs an institution securing common interests, and therefore I would like to put some questions. Where do we draw the fiscal the border to the fiscal integration? And do we have a roadmap? I think we have the alternative to speed up or to split up the European Currency Union. And my question is, does the presidency of the Council has a roadmap to speed up, to introduce and to strengthen the community method? Thank you very much.
Contributor is Lord Lydon Henry Harrison from the United Kingdom. Lord Harrison.
Colleagues, my committee published an important report on the banking union shortly before Christmas, and in the aftermath, our third appraisal of the euro area crisis. In each of these, we concerned ourselves about potential complacency from the United Kingdom government. But I also draw attention to potential complacency as a result of my attending in January the European semester in Brussels, where everyone was looking forward to the kind of changes outlined by Commissioner Olli Rehn. But of course a vote may go wrong within the European Union this evening, which could throw all these matters into disrepair. So I do say to the Commissioner and others to take heart from Mario Draghi's decisive intervention last summer in terms of the ECB doing whatever it takes to save the euro. And in that respect, I pose to Olli Rehn what is happening to the single resolution mechanism which you will outline this summer. We must have clear views on that. And to Mr. Noonan, who talked about the deposit insurance, but this falls far short of the original common guarantee scheme that was promised. May I also just take the opportunity to say that we should have a drive for the single market, perhaps each country prioritising the most important element for them in the single market. That Olli Rehn's mention of trade is hugely important and much neglected by parliamentarians throughout the European Union, and I'll mention that in the afternoon session. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lord Harrison. I know our final contributor to this session, before I bring in the Commissioner and the Minister to respond, is Ms Sharon Bowles from the European Parliament. Ms Bowles.
Thank you very much. During the moves to greater integration, the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee of the European Parliament has always been looking for ways to enhance the accountability to citizens via both the European Parliament and the national parliaments. And we've done our utmost to put those things into legislation, and we're learning and improving how to maximise on what has been established in the semester and the six-pack. And this involves the economic dialogues with finance ministers, which I have to point out is also a platform for a member state to explain where it might differ from the views of the Commission. And we have also done, of course, the European Parliamentary Week as our sort of ongoing improvements on the semester dialogue. As has been mentioned, we have reached agreement on the two-pack. This transposes parts of the fiscal compact into secondary union legislation. we'll be formalising the votes in March, but we do know that as soon as we've completed this, the Commission will come forward with the next phase, which I believe to be legislation on competitiveness and convergence. I'll turn now just to update you on the Banking Union SSM proposals. Now, these are before us in trialogue at the moment, and on many issues the Council and the European Parliament made similar amendments to the Commission proposals, but I think again it's fair to say that the European Parliament gave stronger provisions on accountability. We're very conscious that we are still a long way from severing this bank sovereign link, and at the moment national parliaments have some sovereignty over banking supervision, and we cannot have the situation that that is not replaced either at the European level or at the national parliament level. One of the largest outstanding items will be how is the chair going to be appointed and the role of the European Parliament in that. No questions, that was just a statement and update. Thank you.
In inviting Commissioner Wren and Minister Noonan in is I might move between both of them as they deal with different points. So I'll commence with asking Commissioner Wren to address the 5 questions and statements that were put to the chair and panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very pertinent comments and questions. I try to be as concise as I can so that we have more time for discussion. I take the last first, i.e. Sharon Bowles. Many thanks for your very important work in order to ensure further improvement of our economic governance. And I think the deal, the political deal achieved on the 2-pack last week was indeed a major stepping stone. And I can tell you that it is the essential foundation of the whole exercise of rebuilding the economic and monetary union. Without the 2-pack, we could not have moved forward on the rest of our roadmap. So I want to express my gratitude to both the European Parliament, to the Irish Presidency, and to all member states who have in the Council very constructively contributed to the adoption of this important piece of legislation. Deuxièmement, quelques comments pour l'intervention de Monsieur Marini. Je pourrais répondre en français, parce que le Figaro a dit samedi que Monsieur
Figaro said that at the summit, Mr. Wren speaks a rather clipped French, but still
in English, at least still today. So I'll do some further training and I'll come back in French then. So I think your point on the OECD report on base evasion and profit shifting is very important. I can tell you it was introduced in the G20 ministerial and governor meeting in Moscow last weekend, and I'm very much looking forward to having a serious debate on that both in the European institutions and in the context of G20. The fight against tax evasion and further steps in tax policy should be an essential element of the reform of the economic and monetary union. Mr. Gilguinet referred to many important issues, employment, capacity to invest, fight against poverty. I very much share your objectives, and I see that we have to work with a dual strategy of both advancing the sustainability of public finances and boosting economic growth and job creation. There is obviously no silver bullet, and as regards investment, which was the main issue in your question, it's essential to conclude the repair of the banking sector and financial industry with consistency and urgency. If you recall what the United States did immediately after the financial crisis, because the crisis hit first, as we know, in the US and only 1 or 2 years later in the European Union. The first thing the US did with a considerable degree of success was the repair of the financial system, which helped to restore credit and help to restore economic recovery. We have done the same, but mainly due to the complexity of the European Union compared to the political structure of the United States. It has taken a little bit more time, but we are on a good path on this. And for instance, Spain, to which I referred in my introductory remarks, we are making a very strong effort together with Spain in order to complete the repair of the Spanish banking system so that credit can flow again in Spain. The same story in the rest of Europe. At the same time, the EIB is a very important instrument which will, in line with the Compact of Growth and Jobs, provide further resources for investment. And then we have the discussion of further mutualization of economic risk and public debt. This brings me to the question of Michael Theurer, who called for a roadmap from the Council, but maybe the Commission can also respond to you. As I said, the two-pack was extremely important, and in that context, when we have the vote in March, the European Commission has committed to make a declaration in which we will say that we will set up an expert group that has a timeline until March next year, and this expert group will look into alternatives. We look into alternatives and partial ways and means of finding alternatives to national issuance of public debt. In other words, this expert group will look into the options of partial substitution of national issuance by European joint issuance of public debt, such as the well-known proposal of the redemption fund, or in fact debt redemption pact of the German Council of Economic Experts, as well as the possibility of introducing some more short-term Eurobills. We will look at both the economics of this, the financial market aspects of this, as well as the legal issues related to any possible partial replacement of national issuance. In other words, this will be brought into the European debate, and as I said in my opening remarks, our view is that the guiding principle of further rebuilding of economic and monetary union needs to be that the increased solidarity must be accompanied with increased responsibility, which basically means we need to further reinforce economic governance in order to be able to have further solidarity mechanisms in the Eurozone. Very finally, I want to express my gratitude to Lord Harrison for the excellent reports of the House of Lords, which we always study with great interest, both on the Eurozone crisis and financial regulation. And I want to also thank the United Kingdom for major contribution to saving the euro by providing the venue to the speech of President Mario Draghi in July during the Olympic Games. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And Minister Michael Noonan.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to be associated with the remarks made by Commissioner Rehn on how constructive and effective Sharon Bowles is in her committee. She maintains the parliamentary position, but at the same time is willing to negotiate to advance projects. And I think that's an ideal position for the chair of a committee. So thank you very much indeed, Sharon. The Commissioner has dealt with practically all the issues raised. I think Lord Harrison raised one issue about the deposit guarantee scheme, which would run from a banking union. And, you know, as it develops and as discussion takes place, the guarantee will be guaranteed by way of an insurance scheme. But it's work in progress. There's no final paper yet, and that's being developed. But I can assure you there's no resiling from the general principle of having an effective guarantee on deposits up to a certain limit across the union in the context of banking union. A number of references have been made to the impossibility of having growth and job creation while austerity is the main program across Europe. I'd like to challenge that, because there are two sides to an economy. There's the supply side as well as the demand side. And while as demand creates supply, supply also creates demand. And if economic managers in countries look at the different sectors of the economy and concentrate on supply, that can generate growth as well. For example, if you take things that you're most familiar with in modern life, like iPhones and iPads and the myriad of IT and indeed the myriad of life science products that are available in medicine now, the supply came first. The supply generated its own demand. And if you look at what can be done in an economy by cutting the cost base, by improving the products, by using the latest science and technology and applying them to products, you can get a supply stream running through an economy which leads to growth, and that creates its own demand. Now, I mean, the idea that we must all hold our breath until we reverse back into the kind of economics that caused the crisis, piling debt on debt and deficit on deficit, and somehow or another returning to piling debt on debt and deficit on deficit is the solution. I mean, I would like to challenge that. And there is a supply side to the economy, and if you apply the supply side initiatives to various sectors in any national economy, you'll get growth. We've been doing it for 2 years now in the most adverse circumstances, and the Commission are predicting that Ireland will have the strongest growth rate in Western Europe this year and next year. But it's because we have been doing things on the supply side. We don't have the resources on the demand side, first of all, to have a kind of a new deal. But I would also challenge the wisdom of relying on the demand side when it was those initiatives that caused the problem in the first instance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noonan. I now call on Mr. Antonios Bizas of the Hellenic Parliament in Greece. Mr. Bizas.
Thank you, Mr. President. During the past months, the European Union has made important steps in order to address the shortcomings of the original architecture of the EMU that the current economic crisis has revealed. In this respect, significant progress has been made on the creation of the European Banking Union. Our country aspires towards the full operation of this mechanism at a European level, covering all Eurozone banks and providing for adequate contribution on the part of the private sector at anti-bank resolution costs whatsoever. Moreover, they should be complemented by the single deposit guarantee mechanism that will limit the risk related to the deposit transfers between countries and institutions and guarantee the protection of the depositors of the EU. In addition, it should be provided that the single resolution mechanism will recapitalize directly the failing banks via the European Stability Mechanism without affecting the public debt of the Member States. We look forward to the immediate clarification of the proposed mechanism's operational framework as well as their timely implementation. For instance, the framework does not provide clearly for the possibility of retrospective recapitalization for the Member States under an adjustment program. Finally, it is essential for the EMU's process to be open and transparent, ensuring democratic legitimacy via constant consultations and broad participation of both the national parliaments and the European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Kimmo Sasi of the Finnish Parliament. Mr. Sasi.
Thank you, Honourable President. Let me place two questions to Mr. Rehn. First of all, every January or February we say at the end of the year there will be growth in the economy. Then we see something in sovereign debt problem, and then there is no growth. The situation is worse. There are some good signs on the markets as far as Portugal and Ireland are concerned, but when I look at the elections in Italy, what will happen then, when I look at Cyprus and how difficult it will be at the end of March, and especially with the banking sector, and when I see Greece, that has not been solved, so I don't see very much light at the end of the tunnel at this moment. So your assumption, is that realistic for the future growth? And then, what is your estimate, how high will the debt ratio in relation to GDP be will go over 90, and within which time frame we should reduce the debt from 90 to 60, because that has an impact on the growth. My second question is that there are proposals by the Commission and Van Rompuy at the table in summit in December. And I must say that as far as shared responsibility of national debt or banking debt, so it's very difficult to get any public support or democratic accountability in my country for sharing that debt. And then my question is, well, for example, if you take Eurobonds, that's, well, it's the same thing what was done in the beginning of the financial crisis, good debt and bad debt, and then we try to give a wrong picture of the debt. So I think it's basically a wrong idea. But if they would be established, and if, for example, Finland would stay outside the system, would that be a problem if some countries in the euro area are in the system and some countries opt out? Or would that be even preferable to develop euro in the future?
Thank you very much, Mr. Sassi. Our next speaker is Mr. Eduardo Cabrita from the Assembly of the Republic of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think these meetings are quite important, as the only answer for the economic and financial crisis in Europe is not an isolated answer from each country, is a global answer. As we have seen from the last 3 years, there is no answer looking just for some countries as a problem. The problem has begun to be solved when the European Central Bank gives a global answer. And that means in the financial side of the crisis, we are moving on the right side during the last 6 months. But you should look also to the economic side. And in this proposal, our coordination is much more weaker. And what we are facing now is euro area is in recession. Even the countries like Finland, France, or Netherlands are in recession now. The Portuguese case is a good example of how strong efforts done with a large political support and a large social support are not successful if you look only to the austerity side. Portugal made a strong effort, was back in the markets, in the financial markets last month, but what we're facing now is unemployment rising from 12 to 17%. We have doubled the recession compared with the previous forecast a few months ago, and I think social and political support for austerity process is vanishing. You should look ahead to a closer answer, looking for a global European solution, giving priority for jobs and for growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cabrita. Our next speaker is Ms. Valérie Lebon from the French National Assembly. Mr. Bon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would like to raise 2 points. The first, I think, is an important step forward, which has happened since we met in Cyprus, which relates to banking supervision. And this was adopted in December. Now, this banking supervision means that the European Central Bank will be responsible for implementing this. They'll be responsible to the European Parliament, but also to the Commission. And so what I'd like to know from the participants is to what extent do the national parliaments or will the national parliaments have any responsibility for good implementation of this banking supervision? Because, as I say, I think it's a very important step forwards in the construction of Europe. Now, an underlying question relating to the banking resolution system, which was adopted first and foremost in Ireland. The French Parliament is in the process of adopting banking legislation which attaches a lot of importance to resolution. Creditors and so on, they are also very important when it comes to the construction of Europe. And then I also come back to the issue of company tax, efforts towards convergence on the fiscal receipts that we want to achieve. So that's a subject which I also think is very important for our regular meetings. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with a great deal of what has been said, but last week I was at an OSCE meeting in Vienna where the Economic and Environmental Committee met, and I think we put a particular focus on a younger generation of European who is struggling to find hope at the end of the tunnel. I agree with the idea that we're going to resolve our banking situation and our national states also, but there needs to be a third prong approach to this, and that is dealing with the individual at the same time. The level of debt in comparison with generations gone before is unprecedented. The level of unrestricted opportunity is not equal to what has gone on in the European Union in the past also. On the supply side, we have an enormous amount of workforce, but we have a small amount of money available. Costs are increasing and expenditure and wages are decreasing. It seems that deficit and debt are not the way forward. Why is our currency as strong as it is when there are so many people struggling to create demand and drive supply? And many of the industrialists that we meet throughout Europe at the moment tell us that their existing products, such as the car manufacturers and computer manufacturers, they are declining in sales. And we're seeing some of the workforce migrating towards those very same countries that their sales are decreasing. Is it needed that we print more euro in order to resolve this crisis? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spring. If not, call on Minister Noonan to respond. Mr. Noonan.
I think the bulk of the questions are directed at Commissioner Wren. A number of them would apply to the presidency. On the issue of company taxation, there is a paper from the Commission on the CCCTB, the common base of tax, and we will have a full discussion on that before the end of our presidency, probably May or June. Obviously, it's a controversial area, and individual countries have individual views, and there are as many views as there are countries, as far as I can see. But we will have a full and open discussion on it in the course of the presidency. I don't think there was anything else that was specifically within the remit of the presidency, so I'll allow the Commissioner to answer with more length.
Thank you, Mr. Noonan. Commissioner Wren.
Thank you. There were some direct questions. I try to respond to those, which is my job. Starting with Mr. Bezas from Greece, you referred to the recapitalization of direct recapitalization of euro area banks by the European Stability Mechanism, and in a retrospective manner as well. It is work in progress to define the precise guidelines of direct bank recapitalization of euro area banks by a regular decision, separate and regular decision by the ESM. And this work is done by the task force under the Eurogroup, and this work is expected to be concluded and will have to be concluded by the end of the coming spring. As regards the issue of legacy assets, you also heard what my former colleague Mr. Sassi said. You may discuss this issue with Mr. Sassi and with your German and Dutch counterparts. This is one of the virtues of this kind of meetings, that you can build bridges between the north and the south and other parts of Europe. And I think we really need to build bridges in Europe between the stability culture and the mutualization culture, because there is no simple solution to the crisis. No single issue movement can solve this crisis, but we need to work on all fronts. Mr. Sasi carries the best tradition of Finnish democracy, but also the most challenging tradition of Finnish democracy by posing very difficult and shrewd questions. As regards your point concerning what are the risks to returning to economic recovery this year, you mentioned some political events and financial events. I think there is no denying that we have still major challenges ahead of us, and I for one have never said that the crisis is over. I believe the worst is over, because the perceived risk of the breakup of the euro area is virtually or in fact completely disappeared. And that helped a lot, that brought interest rates to an extent down and narrowed the bond spreads. But we still have plenty of work to do, and we cannot afford any kind of accident, be it financial or political accident, because otherwise it would have a negative impact on growth in Europe, as some accidents in the winter, late winter, early spring of 2012 last year, including the very painful period of two times elections in Greece, which greatly increased uncertainty in the whole Eurozone, together with some other factors in spring-winter last year. You asked when the debt ratio could come back to 60%. There is no scientific answer to this, but I give you 2 points. First, it took 2 years to increase debt from 60 to 80%, 2 or 3 years, but it took 20 years to reduce it from 80% to 60% in the previous decades. So that tells us something about the magnitude of the challenge, and also the need to have a medium to long-term approach of the structural sustainability of public finances over the medium term, and to take economic growth into consideration in this equation. The second point is that the six-pack finally introduced the debt criterion to the Stability and Growth Pact in a credible manner. And for those countries whose public debt is above 6%, the rule is that one has to reduce it at least by 1/20th of the difference per year to 60%, which actually is pretty much in line with the first point of 20 decades, 20 points. You refer also to Eurobonds and the possibility of an opt-out. I would rather underline the unity of the European Union and of the Eurozone. The Commission has always underlined the importance of maintaining the unity of the Eurozone as much as possible when taking important policy decisions, and I will respect that tradition of underlining the unity of the Eurozone and of the European Union. Mr. Cabrita made a very important point concerning the challenges of the Portuguese program, which is on track, and as you may know, the review mission starts today in Lisbon, and we will also, I can tell you that we will then study in depth the considerations of economic growth and the forecast of economic growth with our partners. And if needed, we will update the growth forecast we presented last Friday. Here, I think it's maybe worth mentioning that as there has been quite some debate on fiscal multipliers in Europe, I just want to quote 2 or 3 sentences from the document of my good friend Olivier Blanchard and Daniel Lee, who prepared the IMF staff working paper, because some aspects of this some conclusions of this paper seem to have been forgotten in the public debate that has been going quite lively and intensive in the recent days and weeks, as you know, in some of the countries. The authors themselves warn that, I quote directly, deciding on the appropriate stance of fiscal policy requires much more than an assessment on the size of short-term effects of consolidation on growth. In particular, the results do not imply that fiscal consolidation is undesirable. End of quote. Second quote, the short-term effects of fiscal policy on economic activity are only one of the many factors that need to be considered in determining the appropriate pace of fiscal consolidation for any single country. And the third quote, confidence effects may offset direct effects, unquote. And if you take, for instance, the case of Greece in the end of 2009, early 2010, the fiscal deficit reached almost 16% in Greece in 2009. So Greece was living beyond its means, 16 euros per every 100 euro. And it was not anymore able to receive market financing, and then its partners of the Eurozone came to rescue Greece, and I think it's important to keep in mind the cause and consequence. It was not exactly a rapid and voluntary decision to go and set up a program for Greece by the EU and the IMF. It was because Greece was back against the wall and could not anymore fund itself from the markets. Then we had to design the program, and we have redesigned it already many times, and we have tried to improve it so that it focuses more on the structural improvements of the economy and thus facilitates economic growth and job creation. And finally, the questions of Madame Valérie Rabault referring to the banking union. I think Michael Noonan already responded to the essence of this. I can just say that from the Commission point of view, Michel Barnier, my colleague and friend, is working very actively in order to finalize the legislative proposal on the single resolution mechanism. And we see that we should not have a too long time lag between the single supervisory mechanism and the single resolution mechanism, because supervision and resolution must go hand in hand at the same political level in order to avoid any kind of free riding or moral hazard problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wren. Before I bring this session to a conclusion, the session 1, the future evolution of economic and monetary union, I would just maybe like to add a comment or two myself. From what I understand, this is the first time that an event of this nature during the presidency has actually been broadcast live on television. So there are people sitting at home this evening and they're saying, or this morning, what is actually happening inside in this room? And what I would like maybe to put a question to yourself, Commissioner, is what relevance is what we're doing today? What does it actually have to people who are viewing us this morning? Specifically to people who are sitting at home because they don't have work at this moment in time and they are going through a lot of serious hardship and are wondering how detached is Europe from us, what is actually happening in Europe, and they're hearing a lot of the books being balanced and discussions about the books being balanced and so forth. But for those persons who are watching in this morning, what they want to know is what is the social dividend that's going to come out of this process. There is both task and there is process and there is outcome. What is the outcome that we as a community, and particularly what is the outcome that the Commission itself is actually speaking at and looking at in terms of a social dividend as we go through this consolidation process? And I think I've done that under 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I try to respond in less than 2 minutes. I'm fully aware that many of our fellow citizens in Europe, in many parts of Europe, also in this country, many parts in Southern Europe, many parts in Central and Northern Europe, have serious difficulties because of the social consequences of the financial crisis and the economic recession. which started in 2008 from the other side of the Atlantic and then subsequently hit Europe very hard and created the combined intertwined banking and debt crisis. Today's discussion shows that the members of Parliament and members of the European Parliament are very concerned of the serious situation of our citizens and we try to improve things so that we can return to recovery and do it as fast as possible so that we create solid foundations for sustainable growth, better welfare and improved job creation. And this is what this meeting is about because we are indeed working together in Europe and we need to work together within the new framework of economic governance which will prevent a crisis, the kind of crisis we saw in the past couple of years and should also help in order to return to recovery and facilitate high rate of economic growth and facilitate better employment.
Thank you, Commissioner Wren. Thank Minister Michael Noonan. We now conclude session 1 of this morning's programme, The Future Evolution of Economic Monetary Union. We will recommence for session 2 with the topic of supporting growth and reform, the EU financial framework up to 2020. As we're finishing just about 10 minutes earlier than what expected, could I recommend that we would resume after the coffee break at 10:50, that is 10 minutes before 11 o'clock, if that's agreeable. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much.